Practice.
Learning.
Lived experiences.
The Youth Work Exchange.
Welcome to the first episode of Youth Work Exchange, the National Youth Agency podcast, where we shine a spotlight on high quality youth work practice and effective use of the youth work curriculum. The podcast is aimed at anyone who is keen to hear how the youth work curriculum is helping to foster best practice approaches around youth participation, inclusion, and what matters to young people. In this episode, we explore Authoring Our Own Stories, a 5-year youth-led research project funded by the National Lottery Community Fund and delivered by Partnerships for Young London in collaboration with the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Youth Work Unit, Youth Focus North West and Youth Focus South West. This isn't just research, it's creative research. Through arts-based workshops and multimedia storytelling, young people use photography, videography, creative writing and graphic art to talk about their own civic identity and challenge systemic inequalities and limiting expectations about their futures. Featuring 4 young people involved in delivering the project, the conversation provides powerful insights and lessons learned about co-production and youth leadership. Joining me are youth worker and project manager Sandra Vacciana, who's been part of the delivery team, and Yash, Jack, Summer and Scarlet, 4 incredible young leaders shaping this work from across the regions. Before we dive in, could you each introduce yourselves?
I'm Sandra Vacciana. I work for Partnership for Young London and my role is the national lead for Authoring Our Own Stories, and I'm also the regional lead for London.
Hello, my name is Jack and I was a young leader on this project, and then I ended up doing a little bit of work as well afterwards on the year after. So that was good fun.
And a really professional environment, I must say, Jack, that you're sitting in there.
Don't be fooled, it's like £2 from Amazon.
My name's Summer. I'm a young leader from Moseley. Hiya, I'm Scarlet from Plymouth.
My name is Yash. I'm a young person with PYL.
Thank you. So we're going to start looking at how the programme evolved. As my understanding is the project grew out of a pilot in 2019, 2020. And I think it was over 400 young people and 60 youth workers explored how identity impacts access to services. And young people said they wanted safe spaces to research and express their multiple identities and their experiences. Sandra, can you talk us through that a little bit? Explain to us what the initial idea behind Authoring Our Own Stories was and where did the need come from?
Sure. In 2019, one of the key things that Partnership for Young London and then a couple of the regional youth policy units were really keen to explore in more depth was how young people's regional identities or their civic identities are formed, and how much agency or power, if you like, young people felt they had over shaping and influencing their own identities, and how much they felt their identities were imposed on them by ideas from adults. And we had several one-to-one interviews with young people, particularly young people from minoritized communities. The young people that participated in the project felt that they didn't have as much power and control over how their identities were represented as they wanted, and that identity was much more fluid than adults possibly understood it to be. And while we were doing that research, the pandemic happened. And so what also became apparent was that we couldn't go back to business as usual, in inverted commas, once that pandemic ended, and that there was a lot of inequality disproportionately affecting young people from minoritized communities, and that we had to build that into the learning through this pilot project. So we decided to apply for more funding from the National Community Lottery Fund to expand the project and respond to some of the recommendations that came out of that pilot in 2019, 2020.
And this was across the regional youth work unit specifically.
Yeah.
You came together and had those conversations and specifically looked at the inequality and the disempowerment that you had identified and the ways in which you could then move forwards, so that it was specific to the regions, that specific approach.
It was both. There were regional issues coming out of the conversations that were being had with young people, but there were some really common themes across the different regions, which made it apparent that this should be a national piece of work as well as a regional one.
And were there any kind of issues or gaps that young people you think were experiencing over and above the disempowerment and issues relating to identity, especially if you're looking at that kind of regional approach as well?
There are lots of differences, and I'm sure the young leaders will speak to that in greater depth than I can. The really obvious ones are that there were some communities that felt they were completely overlooked, and I'm sure Jack will say more about this. So in Yorkshire and Humber, once we did the recruitment in that region for the young leaders, it became apparent that there were some specific needs around the lived experience of young white working class men. In London, it was more exploratory, but the recurring theme in our work was definitely around mental health services and the language we use when we're talking about emotional being and mental health, and what a non-clinical response to needs around emotional well-being might look like. And there were gender differences that needed to be addressed in London as well, across different gendered groups. The Northwest was very place-based, so looking at the fact that there are lots of regions in the Northwest, in Manchester, in Merseyside, in places like the Wirral, where the central government have just overlooked the needs of those communities. Down in the Southwest, the specific needs were around the lack of opportunities and even positive role models for young people with racialized identities that live in quite remote coastal areas. The theme shifted over the years that the project has been delivered down in the Southwest. So there are some common themes from year to year, like safety, but the focus over the last year or so has been on safety through the lens of young women. So yeah, there are particular needs within each region. And one of the key things that I really want to get across with this work is that despite the fact that on the surface, all of the young leaders from these very specific communities, their experiences might actually look quite different. When we come together and do a deeper dive, it becomes really apparent that they have far more in common than they have differences within their experiences. And that's because the inequalities that they face are happening through the barriers that are created through the systems that they have to navigate on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and that's such a common theme. We hear that across other areas of work as well. It'd be really good to explore that as we move through the conversation. And just before we move to Jack, Scarlet, Yash and Summer and look at things in a little bit more detail from their perspectives, did you touch very briefly on how young people kind of influenced the design from the start?
Well, I'm sure the young leaders, again, will say a bit more about that than me, but the basic principle from the get-go with the regional leads is to engage in conversation with the young leaders in the room. I hope everybody on this call agrees with me on that. So we're collectively shaping the direction of the work, because it would be an absolute nonsense to go in and be really authoritarian about the whole thing. No one wants to be part of that. It's meant to be co-produced. It's developed through consultation.
Yeah. Great opportunity now to be able to move on to, should we start with Jack up in Yorkshire and Humber? You want to talk to us a little bit about how that kind of developed, kind of issues and challenges around that, and how your community shaped the work in that area specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, initially, what we did was we thought that if we're going to go into different communities and ask them to explore their identity, then actually we needed to do that first. So the exercise that we did was we had lots of different bits of paper, some post-it notes, and we wrote on key things that we thought resonated with our identity. What we then did is we stripped that back, and it was actually quite fun. We were throwing them in the air and everything. And it was all a bit of a laugh. But we stripped them back to what we thought the more core principles were that summed up our sort of identity. There was lots of different things that people were talking about, sort of gender identity as well. But then ultimately, it came down to a lot about where they lived, a lot about expectations. Um, and then I think that what we kind of discovered from that is that as humans, we like to kind of classify ourselves and put ourselves in these neat little boxes. We like to quantize things. We like to make things make sense in this chaotic world that doesn't seem to make that much sense. So from that randomness came these things like I'm a man, I'm this, I'm whatever. Um, and actually, I think that then when we looked at different community groups and we started to work with people, we started to notice a few patterns. A lot of the young men that we were speaking to felt that they had a lot of expectations of how their life should be, what jobs they should go into, what opportunities were available to them, what things they should be doing, how they should be behaving. Um, and actually from that then we decided to maybe challenge some of that and explore where this was coming from. And that's when we started to work with the amazing Dr. Kat Simpson, who is absolutely fantastic. She coined the term social haunting, which is very much about how your lived experience or how things that have happened in the past can influence your behavior in today's world. So then we started to really look at what happened in Barnsley in the past. And so we started to look at the mining, we started to look at the strikes and how that then affected people's lives and what life was like before the strikes and then what it was like during and after. And then drawing the comparisons between then and how that's impacted today.
Absolutely fascinating, Jack, and that whole concept around social haunting, and I think we're going to touch on that a little bit later perhaps in a little bit more depth, but really fascinating, and for you to be able to really explore your kind of history and how that's impacting today's expectations on young people and what might have changed or not changed as well. And it'd be interesting to see as we go around and talk to individuals as to where those similarities start to occur as well. And Scarlet, let's move to you down in the southwest there. And I know you're quite recent to the programme, but what's your kind of like knowledge or experience of how the programme was developed?
It's kind of funny you talk about similarities because I think so we started in September on the Violence Against Women and Girls kind of project. So there's three of us, and the first thing we kind of did was talk about what does being a young woman in Plymouth mean to us? What's our experience with being a young woman in Plymouth? And so on and so forth. We've done a lot of work. Plymouth is done a lot of work as a whole around violence against women and girls after the death of Bobby Ann. So that is something that, as I said, we've really focused on, and I'm involved with Youth Parliament as well. We've done a lot of work in there. So it's always been something I've had awareness of and awareness of the issues, but hearing it from other people that might not do like Youth Parliament and things like that and talk about what it means to them is really good. We also talked about our role models. So in the Southwest, you don't get a lot of like famous people from the Southwest, you know what I mean? So we talked about our role models either from the Southwest or just in general, and what they mean to us and what they mean to achieve our dreams. Because it's one thing just being a woman in Plymouth, but it's another thing being a woman trying to go into the workplace or other things like that.
Yeah.
So kind of what from that we ended up making a survey because we kind of figured that a lot of our work and a lot of what we were thinking was that we didn't feel safe. We have purple help points around Plymouth. So you can call them if you need help and police will come to you, and they are a really good strategy. But even after all these things have been put in place, it still didn't feel safe. So we sent out a survey to schools and pretty much a lot of young people in Plymouth. What we found out was a lot of young people didn't feel heard in school. They didn't know how to report if something happened. Racism was a big part. I know that was the topic of our project last year or a couple of years ago. Not feeling safe was a big part of that. So that's kind of what we got up to at the moment. We're going to write a report and think about where we can take these answers.
Let's move on to Yash now and understand a little bit more about how it developed in London.
Yeah, so as I said before, I was in year 3 and we focused on civil identity and mental health. And we ran a couple of focus groups within August. Yeah, within August. And we went to different parts of London. So we went to a place in Hoxton, we went to a place in Lewisham, we met up with NCS's youth board before they disbanded. And we found that a lot of people knew about their identity, but didn't actually think about their civil identity. So that was one of the key points we took away. And then second of all, we um, created some resources. One of them was called the Wellbeing Gallery, where you basically just draw what you like to do in order to help your well-being and mental health. Then we used something called Kelly's Story, which basically it's a storyboard of a West African girl called Kelly who's struggling with her mental health, and she's navigating difficult situations with her parents not really understanding and at school being quite difficult and sort of looking at scenarios of where Kelly ends up and how we can sort of help her. Using those two resources, we gathered a lot about what the young people thought with their mental health, and we saw that when we did the wellbeing gallery, a lot of people relied on their friends and sort of going outdoors to look after themselves. We also created a little dollhouse to represent some of our findings. A lot of young people really just didn't know all these things about themselves and didn't really think about it as much because nowadays it's quite difficult to sort of look into it a lot, especially when you're at school. We had a lot of young people under 18, and we just found that they didn't really know what they could actually do further on to help with themselves. So it was a really big learning curve. And within London, the themes have kind of been changing because last year, year 4 was more focused on ethnic women. And the year before that, it was just focused on ethnic groups and mental health. But it was really interesting to see how different experience varied within the different boroughs. And one final thing was they really enjoyed the creative part of it. And that's something that we learned a lot from our research ourselves. The bog standard sort of like focus group chatting, writing, it's not really helpful. It doesn't get much out of young people. Sort of getting them to draw, getting them to be creative and think for themselves on what they want to do. That's probably the best thing you can do in order to develop your understanding of what young people sort of go through and their perspectives.
Yes, that's really interesting. And when we've come to summer, there's just a couple of little points I just wanted to we want to pick up on there as well. Summer, do you want to have a bit of give us a little bit of an overview of the Northwest?
Like, so we went to, like, different, like, groups in there, like, one was called Census 63, and, like, they were saying they want more stuff to do while you go out and that, because, like, by ours, there's nothing to do. We want people to actually listen to us, like, stuff to do, because they shout at you when you're on the street and that, and, like, the police would stop you if you're on the street or something, for no reason, and, like, and then they go wide on the street, like, there's nothing to do, but they do nothing about it and that. Like, we want to be understood. So, like, where did they want us to go? Just sit in, but you want to go out and that.
So your focus then was more around that kind of like you've identified there aren't many safe places or safe spaces to be on the streets to be able to be yourselves without perhaps people making assumptions about what you're doing. So just a quick from each one of you, kind of what made you want to get involved and what did you hope to kind of change or achieve? And I'll start with Yash this time.
Yeah, so mine is not as deep as you might think. I just sort of got recommended by a youth worker to this project. I didn't actually really know what it was about, but I saw that it was sort of a creative, sort of research-based project. It was really interesting to hear about sort of these ideas of civic identity and looking at my background in my culture and ethnic group. I was really interested in the fact that it was looking at our experiences as well, and not just sort of things that have been pre-put out there in terms of already found findings, and the fact that we were going to look for it ourselves. I was also really interested in sort of the artistic based and sort of looking at it from a more creative based side. I mean, in our first session alone, we had quite a lot of different toys and a lot of different ways that we were going to find make resources. For example, Sandra gave us a book to sort of write down our experiences and sort of our elders' experiences. So that was really interesting. And I guess finally, it was also the fact that it was quite a community-based thing, which I really enjoyed. And I feel like that's what a lot of projects are missing. When I hear community, I sort of think of like people in my sort of cultural group or sort of ethnic group. Like for me, I am Mauritian and I sort of associate myself with the South Asian Indo-Mauritian group. But when they spoke about community at was this project, it was a whole group of different people.
Yeah, and that idea of a different type of community of people coming together with a shared experience, looking to kind of unwrap and understand those issues a bit more, but being able to vocalize that, whether it's in a creative way or visually or spoken in whatever way, or telling stories. Yeah, that's really interesting. Scarlet, what about yourself? You're quite new to the group, you're quite new to the activity. What made you want to get involved?
Well, I'm kind of involved with a lot of similar groups. So in Plymouth, we have a lot of participation team groups. I think what I want to achieve from this, I want to see change. I want to see young people listen to. I always strive for that with all bits of work that I do. I always strive for young people to see the change and to be heard. And especially after the seven, when we found out a lot of young people feel like that's not happening, it makes you want to strive more, makes you really want to go for it. And I think also just like improvements, make spaces safer around Plymouth, make city centre safer.
Quite similar to what Summer was saying, really, and I love that see the change, to be able to see the change is so rewarding, but also that give it a go, that kind of give it a go idea. I think yeah, really respect that. Summer, what about yourself then?
Like I want adults to actually listen to us. Not because like normally they just ignore you because we're kids and that, but they was once kids and that. Like they should understand like what we want to do. But when they was younger, they had stuff to do and that. This is now we've got nothing to do. You've got the odd one or two things to do. But then like go out or something. Or do Mackies, but then you get told off. It's like we want more stuff to do. And adults to actually listen to us and that and understand us where we're coming from and that.
And Jack, what about yourself?
Well, I think mine was a little bit different. I was 22 and I was running a youth theatre and I was commuting from Liverpool to Barnsley every weekend. And I got an email from the Yorkshire and Humber Regional Youth Work Unit asking about if anyone in the youth theatre would like to take part in this opportunity. So I forwarded it on to the relevant parties, and then and as I was reading it, I gave them a call, and I was like, how would you feel if I was involved in this? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. So I think that was really nice. There was also a bit of a monetary incentive as well there, which I think is really important, especially in terms of removing barriers for young people to be able to access these sort of services and really give it their all.
Yeah, and it was different and perhaps slightly unexpected for you as well. Yeah, the opportunity that came your way. So that's really good to hear. And Sandra, I'm going to ask you the same question because, I mean, notwithstanding, obviously, as you've already pointed out, there were some objectives, there were some outcomes, some desired outcomes that you wanted to achieve potentially from the project. But also you mentioned at the beginning about those safe spaces for youth workers as well, to be able to have those conversations, to be able to talk about issues relating to identity, perhaps issues relating to racialised communities, a whole different areas of work and experiences that they might be having across their specific regions. Was that something that you was really keen to be able to support those safe places to have conversations?
Definitely. There's an underlying assumption, it's understandable, but it is an assumption that the young people that we work with can wait for this change to occur. I really wanted to be involved in a project where we had enough time to build some solid relationships with the young people that we were working with and the adults that we were working with, where we could actually explore how to make the change happen in the time frame that we were working to. And I think that myself and my manager, Sharon Long, who's the Director of Partnership for Young London, we wrote this application for funding based on an idea that we needed to think outside of the box. And we have used a lot of artistic methods to do the research. But when we're talking about creative approaches, we're just talking about not doing things in the way that they're normally done. Because if you do things the way that they're normally done, you're probably going to get a similar result to what's already happening. So how can we create at least the potential for this change to happen? I feel really lucky that we were able to get 5 years worth of funding, which is a massive commitment from National Community Lotteries. That generally these sorts of projects only run for, it might be a year. They put a lot of trust in us and to allow us to think outside the box in how we could run a youth voice project. And we had the potential to create opportunities to have more difficult conversations around issues to do with identity. And I wanted to be a part of that.
Yeah, thank you for explaining that. And actually, you were able, through those research methodologies, to be able to identify real common themes amongst those very different thematics, those very different approaches. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
You've mentioned what the common themes are. They are around things like your emotional well-being, because you don't feel safe. Some are really captured, I think, what a lot of young people are telling us, which is that you're just not valued. Describing how young people are treated in Knowsley, it's like you're just getting in the way. That's a common theme across everybody's lived experience. If you don't feel valued, that's going to affect how you feel emotionally, which is going to impact your mental health. So again, that's a common theme. It's all to do with systems. It's a national piece of work because the discrimination is happening at the most basic level. If you're pushed to the margins, whether you're white, black, from the LGBTQ plus community, you're being discriminated against because of your religion, whatever the reason is, if you're disenfranchised and pushed out to the periphery of society, you're going to experience very similar things to other people from different groups, and so that's a fundamental problem that needs to be addressed on a national level. So common themes: mental health, safety, a lack of regeneration, a lack of jobs, a need for better training for not just youth workers, but for professionals that work with young people, more training around the specific needs of some of the groups that we're working with is also a common theme across the work. I could go on and on and on, but those are some of the core themes. The systems create barriers. They push people from minoritized communities, and it's not fair.
Yeah, and that's come across really clearly, that everybody in this space really wants to be able to see change, and feel that change as well. So what kind of recommendations have come forwards from this project? And perhaps, Sandra, if you could give some initial ones, and then if anybody else wants to chip in around anything that they think they might want to contribute.
I think we need to review how training is provided and talk to middle management and senior management so that they support people that do the face-to-face work to attend the training sessions that we often provide.
So if I come to, you're all at different parts in your journey, and Sandra and Yash are very much have been on quite a long journey now and are really starting to understand what those recommendations might look like and the kind of actions from that. But Scarlet, you're really, really new. You're new in that journey at the moment.
Yeah, so we in our survey we did ask what changes would make you feel safer in Plymouth. So we had a few different responses about female-only spaces, education, so educating both males and females about the topic. But more specifically, one thing that's kind of popped up a lot is buses. So having cameras and CCTV at bus stops, making them safer, more reliable. And that is a big thing because I think the death of Bobby Ann did occur near a bus stop, and the reason why it was such a big thing was because this bus stop didn't have a lot of lighting. So you can kind of see that even though that happened a good few years back, you still have these reoccurring themes that are happening now. So I feel that's something we definitely want to work towards. And more so just like it says education on here, we want to make sure that counselors and schools, local schools, are kind of working with us on educating students about this topic and how they keep themselves safe, how they keep their others safe. One thing that was mentioned a lot in this survey was that people didn't know how to report something. So kind of teaching everyone how to report something, because that is something that's really important, because if it doesn't get reported, nothing happens.
Yeah, and some of those things feel so simple, don't they? They feel so obvious, and actually are really, really quite achievable. Yeah, so and again, you'll start to see that change as well, and that whole idea again of working collaboratively, not working in silos, which is so good to hear. That kind of really paying it forward and extending the work. Summer, what about you? Have any recommendations that I mean, it's a big piece of work, safe places, communities, community and towns and all of kind of the oppression that you might be feeling. What kind of recommendations are coming out of the work?
I like mental health and that, because like adults need to understand children's mental health, because like an adults and the kids, like mindset's different. Kids might overthink it more because an adult's done it before. Like being there, done that, and then they're saying to the kid, it's gonna be alright, but like they don't know how it feels to be in our shoes. Because when they was a kid, they might have been overthinking it, and then an adult was putting pressure on them, and that the adult should be trained in like sending that for like special needs kids, so they know how to understand them and that. So like when they get angry, don't just like shout at them. Like be patient and take your time with them. Because if you put pressure on them, they're just gonna get angry and then like have a little meltdown at you, and then you don't know what to do.
Yeah, 100% behind you on that one. Understanding why people do what they do, understanding what behaviour means, and how to respond to it in the best way for that young person, and that whole idea of young people's mental health, and really understanding why that looks so different, especially now post pandemic, but also as you're going through the different changes in your lives as well, and the pressures and what you've been expressing, that you've been experiencing on the streets or in your town centres, wherever that might be, and how that makes you feel. Absolutely. And Jack, what about you?
Well, I think a lot of the findings are really informed by sort of a lot of the key things that we picked up. So the main things really can be split into three sort of categories, which is community, education, and then opportunities. Looking sort of at that community, we found that there was lots of little micro kind of pockets of community. The young people felt a little bit down about their community. I suppose that kind of links back to things like such as the broken window theory, which is the idea that if there's a broken window on a street, another window might be broken, and then there might be graffiti on that building, then people might start to litter. So then, the environment is changing how people behave. Now, I think that we're quite lucky in Barnsley in the fact that we've had this massive regeneration of the town centre, and actually you can see the notable shift in people's behaviour and how people feel about the town. So I think that is something that is improving actually, and that's something that we found. There was this increase of the normalization of crime, the normalization of that, and I think if people feel like they don't have many opportunities, then actually, and if it's more normalized to go into crime, then it's just what people do, and then it's then not about that person being a bad person, but it's just about that person's behavior is being molded by their environment. And then looking into sort of education, it was quite an overwhelmingly. We spoke with quite a few groups. We delivered a lot of workshops with groups. Delivered a workshop with a boxing group, and the biggest thing that we found there was the young people felt that the teachers didn't respect them, so they didn't respect the teachers in school. But then when you looked at the boxing group and you could see that these amazing leaders that they had there that was training them every single weekend, they had massive respect for them. But that's also because they had respect for the young people as well. So we was looking about education and how that might need to change, and obviously the education then links into with the opportunities. And if people, like we said, feel like they've not got a clear path to go on, then they do go into these go down these different routes. So what we've actually done is set up it's a social media campaign essentially, and what it does is it interviews lots of different people that are local people that do lots of different jobs, and the idea is it's to show them that you don't just have to do one thing that you feel that your family want you to do, or that you feel that you're expected to do. But actually there's lots of different avenues and lots of different things you can do, and the videos are informative about how you can get into these, what are the challenges of doing this work, what are the benefits of doing this work, and yeah, so that's now on social media, and young people can follow this and get information about lots of different career pathways.
And what's really interesting, what you were saying there about what I think you were saying, which was about the kind of relationships that trusted adults have with young people, and about how those relationships develop, and how that then supports and enables that young person to perhaps flourish in that environment. And the example you gave where perhaps young people are flourishing less, where the relationship with that trusted adult isn't as positive. So that's really interesting. And Yash, is there anything you wanted to say about the programme you've been on that Sandra might not have mentioned, or that Sandra might not even have perhaps even realised herself, about the kind of recommendations from your perspective?
I think something that I was hearing from everyone was all the themes that we got in terms of like safety, safe spaces, listening to young people. That's the same thing we got. And it's also on that point of safe spaces, especially within ethnic groups, there's not enough of them. There's not enough spaces where young people from Black and Asian communities specifically are able to go to and express themselves because A, they're not culturally aware, and ways and methods of supporting those young people aren't adapted to their cultures, especially in Black and Asian cultures. There's this sort of stereotype and stigma around mental health where if you're firm on a kid, they'll fix themselves eventually. And conventional methods that are used just don't help. And that's something I was hearing as well. Like in CAMS, for example, they might suggest something, but that won't really work because in your household, they're not aware of these sorts of things. So that was one thing that I'd recommend is sort of improve trainings across all youth services to better understand different cultures and backgrounds and provide sort of support from that, not just stick with sort of generic, basic, like, oh, have a nice bath or maybe cut your parents off type of suggestions. I think the second thing, again, is listening to young people. Listen, because young people have a lot of lived experiences which are valuable and they are experts in sort of providing recommendations and solutions. Don't just brush them aside using 1 hour focus groups. Oh, we'll give you pizza and vouchers for your time. No, that's not enough. You actually need to provide certain like updates on where it's at, where their feedback's going, how it's being used, what's going on. Get them speaking to stakeholders. Another theme that came up was toxic masculinity, especially within brown and black boys, and adultification within black women. Adultification also affected their friends because they were black women, and we were thinking of ways to sort of find out how that affected other young black girls. And it's so much more common than people think. And that is a huge, huge problem because young people within these ethnic communities are going to grow up, they're going to think, oh, well, my feelings don't matter, so I'm going to bury it inside and not speak about it and sort of be unsure of myself. And I feel like it affects people more than they think. It causes your mood to change. It just causes you to be unable to sort of face certain situations. It makes you unsure of yourself. It's a big thing. And toxic masculinity, especially within the brown and black community, especially with the rise of like alpha male podcasts, it's becoming such a huge problem because these men who are very well off, who've had pretty good backgrounds growing up, are spewing quite a lot of hatred online, where it just causes young boys to think, well, that's how they are, so I'm going to grow up to be the same. There needs to be a rise in awareness of these sort of stereotypes and stigmas, and there needs to be better education for young people at a young age. It doesn't matter if they're in primary or secondary school. Start it young so they know that these things are not okay and there's ways to tackle it, and get them out, get young people out there speaking.
Well, I mean, I must say, I mean, such all of you, such great advocates and able to really speak really clearly about your understanding of the project, your understanding of how the project's developed, your understanding of how what it should look like, and your understanding of what your findings are from it as well, on what should happen next. Incredibly intuitive. And I wonder, Sandra, if you could just touch kind of briefly on some of the kind of theories and models that you've used across these programs to support that work.
Jack's already talked about social haunting, so I won't say too much about that, other than, as well as it being something really relevant to young white working class men from an ex-mining community, that idea of how ghosts from the past still haunt the experiences of people in the present day is something that we've found relevant to all the communities that we've been working with. We nicked it from Yorkshire and Humber because it was such a brilliant idea to introduce to the project as a whole. So that's been really helpful. We've worked on the principle of something called appreciative inquiry, which is another theoretical model where basically you just start from the point of view that everybody in the space has something really positive to add to the process. You come into the space with strengths, knowledge, and lived experience that we share. And then the other idea that we've used from the get-go, although we haven't necessarily labeled it, is something called grounded theory. So the basic premise is that we don't come in as adults or young people and say, we've got a particular idea, and through this research, we want the participants to either prove it or disprove it. We come in with some ideas that we want to explore, and then we work from the ground up, and learn from what participants share and draw the conclusions around what recommendations should be based on that. Another key one is about working with adults that actually have some influence in being able to create change from whatever work comes from the young people that are participating in a project. And that can be a real stumbling block in our work sometimes. Young leaders might share ideas with us, but if we don't have the influence to create the change, then it's not going to go anywhere. So one of the elements of the Lundy model is to say that there should be adult stakeholders who have a certain level of authority to influence positive outcomes as part of the work.
We're going to move on and sort of drawing things to a close a little bit. It would be really good perhaps to hear from your experience, what other young people might have said to you about the project, about what their experiences might have been. Is there anything that, for instance, Jack, you're able to tell us about what you've heard from other young people that have been involved in the programme?
I think that what's been really nice to see is actually how switched on people are. A while ago, it wasn't like that. It was kind of, we're going to come into your community and we're going to do this. What the young people really appreciated was working with them, and everyone was a stakeholder, and everyone was an expert in their own kind of field, whether it's through their lived experience of living in a community group, or someone coming in and having an arts background and being able to facilitate and work with them to create something based on their experiences. And I think that that's what young people are really appreciating, especially when formal education is not like that, and it's kind of for a lot of young people, not for everyone, but for a lot of young people, it kind of is this banking system model of education where it's kind of just where young people are a deposit box in which for information to be deposited into, opposed to for them to be carving out information and discovering information and wanting to get involved with projects that are not like that and are about that self-discovery. And for us, it was young men that have rejected education, but actually they're very smart and they know what they're doing, and it just shows that sometimes it's not the young person, but it might be the constraints around them that is the issue.
And that whole concept of self-discovery, that's so empowering. Yeah, thank you for that. Summer, what about your friends and your peers that you've been working with? What have they had to say about this piece of work?
Made us all like confident in that. Like when we had to speak in front of everyone and that the first time, what we've done and that together as a team. Because some of us had all different ideas and that, but then we have to come together as a team, work together, like a puzzle, work it all together, put the pieces in like place and that. And then
Nice.
like we've all got confidence. Like some of us didn't speak before it, now like we're mates and that. It's like we've all made mates of it and like friendship and that.
It's good. So it's really improved your relationships and the confidence. And hey, look at you. You're here talking on a podcast today. Scarlet, what about yourself? Are you hearing from other young people that you're working with some of the kind of benefits to them, why they're involved?
I think so, yeah. I think it's really nice to see how kind of knowledgeable we all are on this kind of situation and like the topic. Because there's sometimes that you work with people and they don't really understand what they're working with. But there's only a couple of us in this group, it's like three of us. And we all kind of work seamlessly and we know what our targets are. And we also all really opinionated. It's nice to hear that we all have opinions on something to do with this subject and we all can have a little debate on it or be able to just talk about it. And that's really nice to see because especially if you work in like a big group, that can often be left out and missed. Plymouth has been really focusing on violence against women and girls. So it's really nice to see that it means something to us. And then it means something to hopefully all the other girls in Plymouth who might go through similar situations.
Yeah, thank you. And Yash, yourself, the young people you've come into contact with, what have you kind of understood about their experience?
They've just loved to express themselves. I mean, when we made the Wellbeing Gallery and Kelly's story, I just saw how passionate and excited everyone was. And it was just good vibes and good energy in general. I mean, everyone just loved the fact that it was so open and it was so like you can express yourself in the way that you want, and we can collect data and research in the way that we want to and we feel fit. And it wasn't sort of constrained to what Partnership for Young London wanted in terms of like a written report. If you go to the website and look at the year three report for 2024, you'll see mainly images. You'll see pictures of us. You'll see some of what we've said. You'll see some of the data that we've collected, some of the drawings. And everyone's just loved the fact that we took ownership ourselves. We got to be on the front line doing everything.
That's really good to hear. And Sandra, has this changed your approach to youth work, this project?
Well, definitely. I would be really loath to do another piece of youth work that wasn't co-designed with young people. I think that's a basic principle for me now.
And if there was one thing you could say to any youth workers or practitioners listening today or listening to this podcast, what would the one piece of advice that you might give them, or one piece of learning outside of that kind of co-creation?
To work with your colleagues to create more opportunities for young people to come together to explore different aspects of their identity. And it doesn't have to be a massive event. It's just taking the time to sit down and do what Jack said, create opportunities for self-discovery.
And of course, it's down to our young people to have the last word, I think. Perhaps what I'd like to know is, what would you say to other youth workers or professionals, based on what you've learned from your experience so far in this project, this program? What would you say to them? What one piece of advice would you give to a youth worker? And I'll start with Yash.
Listen and respect. Listen to the young people and respect what they're saying. Don't assume you know what they're going to say and sort of make decisions without them. There's one organization that I know that has a really wonderful saying, nothing about me without me.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Yash. So what about you, Scarlett?
Similar to Yash, just taking on board what young people say and making things young people friendly. The amount of times that people have come into us and said, "Can you make this report young people friendly?" If it's about us, it should already be young people friendly. So kind of just making sure if you're working with and about young people, we should be the first thing you think of when you're creating topics and stuff like that.
Oh, I like that. The first thing you think of. What about you, Summer? What would you say to youth workers from what you've learned so far? What do you think they should do?
Like, listen to us, what we have to say to understand us better than that, instead of just like jumping to conclusions thinking we know what they're on about when we don't. Like, some words, like, you don't know what they mean because you've never heard of them, and you think you know what they mean and that. It's like, take your time with us.
And what about you, Jack?
It's really important that you create an environment which allows people to be in best access a state of critical thinking. Really read the room, you know. If they come in, they're bouncing off the walls, maybe think about putting some calming music on. If they come in and they're a bit, ooh, maybe you know, play that game that they always like to play. Get them. Don't start any work until you've got them into the right headspace, because otherwise you're wasting your time. And yeah, just have fun with it, and just come up with creative ways that you can influence the environment, and you can best get them into the place where they can be most critical and reflective.
Thank you for that. There's some amazing insights. And as you said, we're going to share all of the resources, all of the links, post this podcast for people to be able to visit and to be able to learn more. And as I say, to be able to get in contact with the regional youth work units if you want to have a further conversation. Thank you to Sandra, Yash, Jack, Summer and Scarlett for sharing their insights, and I hope you enjoyed hearing all about their work and the learning they shared as much as I did. You can find out more about authoring our own stories by visiting Partnership for Young London's website. There's also a blog summarising the podcast with links to related resources on the MYA's website at mya.org.uk. Sign up to the MYA network or follow us on social media to be notified of future podcasts, as well as upcoming Youth Work Insight and Connect webinars, where you can hear from sector experts and participate in our community of practice discussions.
Practice. Learning.
Lived experiences.
The Youth Work Exchange.